Australian governments have taken the position they have. And many of you will know when the Rudd government made a very small change in a vote in the UN, people leapt on them. But the people who leapt on them included large numbers of people who are not part of the Jewish community. And as I say, I don't think it's simply a matter of a Jewish lobby or a pro-Israeli lobby. I think there's something that goes deeper in the views of the political classes in Australia about Israel that we really need to analyse better than we have. Right up the back.
So three things that I'd like to address. At the first instance, the issue about the irony of the Jewish people being against gays. I don't know how ironic that is, because we have a we know the beaten, what is it, the abused child syndrome, and so I don't think that that's such a unique situation that persecuted people should find an other to concern itself about. So I wonder what you think about that. The other thing that I wanted to say was that the debate seems to, about Israel and its support, seems to often circle around the issue of Israel's right to existence. And I think that that's off-centre as a debate, because no one talks about the right to existence of Australia or America or any other country. It's really a question of the right to demand its destruction or whatever. And I think that at that level, the support of Australia has more to do with what is very loosely called the culture wars. So it's much more about an attack on the sovereignty of another country, rather than, I think anyway, I mean certainly there are lots of examples in the world where countries are being attacked, or their sovereignty is being attacked. Anyway, I just wonder what you think about those things.
Well, they're two very separate issues. I mean, I think the first point you make is, of course, true. Being persecuted and oppressed doesn't make you a better person. That's perfectly true. On the other hand, it should at least make you aware. But I think what I find interesting is the tacit alliances, which actually links what's going on in diasporic Jewish communities with what's going on in foreign policy. This sort of tacit agreement between Jewish fundamentalists and right-wing Christian fundamentalists. A lot of the support for Israel in the United States, the most vociferous support, is now coming from right-wing fundamentalist churches who ironically have very deep histories of anti-Semitism, but have very strong messianic views of Israel. And there is this sort of strange way in which right-wing fundamentalist oppositions to homosexuality have been picked up by some right-wing Jews in a way that I don't think is actually part of the tradition, but has been imported in some senses from American fundamentalism. In terms of Israel's right to exist, I mean, I very carefully didn't say anything about Israel's right to exist. I think there are two questions. I mean, for me it is unquestioned that in the world we live in, existing states should continue to exist. Not because they're necessarily good, but because the consequences of trying to demolish them seems to be much worse. And in that sense, you know, I think the first Gulf War to defend the integrity of Kuwait was very, very different to the second Gulf War, obviously. But there's another question involved in Israel's right to exist, which is its right to remain a Jewish state, to be defined as a Jewish state, which I think poses very real questions for us. After all, we live in a country that does not define it. So we would all be appalled if Australia officially defined itself as a Christian state and said, if you're not a Christian, we're going to treat you differently.
Yeah.
And for me, there are some very real problems, therefore, in the insistence that Israel need to continue as a Jewish state. I have no problem with arguing the people who are born in Israel are Israelis, and there should be no persecution or discrimination against people based on their religion. That is a rather different proposition. And you know, you've opened up huge questions, but I think in that sense, this is one of the areas where there's not enough careful thinking, and there are two, in that phrase, there are two quite separate phrases. I don't actually think that it is an extension of the cultural wars. And Australia, from the origins of the State of Israel, was a very strong supporter. One of the things I grew up with, my grandfather will be known to some of you, Aaron Patkin, and he was one of the founders of Zionism in Australia. And so I grew up as a kid. I mean, he was already dead, but I grew up with sort of very strong idea that Australia had been one of the staunchest supporters of the creation of Israel. And in a sense, it seems to me that was entrenched in our political establishment long before the cultural wars of the 80s and 90s. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I can see there is an element of cultural warfare now, and sometimes quite unpleasant echoes of it on both sides. But I think the Australian position goes far deeper and has its historic roots in Australia's position in the 1940s.
Can I put something?
Please do.
Thank you. I'm thinking Bill Hartley. Some years ago, Bill Hartley was very much on the warpath as far as Jews in Australia were concerned. And his anti-Israel remarks were very guarded, very openly, or perhaps not so openly, but apparently anti-Jewish. And some friends of mine said to me, look, there's something you've got to do about it. So I did something about it, and I wrote to every Australian Labour Party branch and had asked them to accept a speaker on the topic of Israel and the Jewish community. And as a result of that, I had numbers of invitations all over Victoria to speak at such meetings. And I don't know whether it did me any good, but I hope it did get some of them. Now, what I'm wondering is, well, it's not an opportune moment, but that sort of thing to be done now. Let us, as a group, with your assistance, send out invitations far and wide and invite them to hear speakers on the topic of Israel and the Jewish community, or whatever type of subject appears to us and appeals to them. That's my suggestion.
You know, I'm going to be cynical, and I'm going to suggest that I think that's, at one level, a great idea. At another level, I'm cynical because I don't think that the Labor Party, the Labor government, takes very much notice of its membership. And my cynical sense is that, you know, we're a limited number of people, but we do have certain sorts of intellectual resources. I mean, the intellectual wealth in this room is considerable. Probably, I'm afraid, greater than the real wealth, but there you are. And I think it would be more profitable to engage in discussion with opinion makers in the media, and particularly with up-and-coming MPs. I mean, I think by the time someone is Deputy Prime Minister, you're not going to have access or change her mind. You might, but probably you're not. The people who I think are really crucial are the new backbenchers who came in at the last election, the Labor Party, and then God knows the rabble who will be elected for the other side at the next election. And at this stage wouldn't want to waste any time lobbying backbench Liberals because they probably won't be there. But seriously, I think it's at that level, rather than at the level of branches, that given limited resources and limited time and limited energy, it is more sensible to concentrate. And there I think, you know, inviting, and you probably do this anyway, but trying to get, and somebody referred to the dialogue that my colleague Joe Camilleri runs, trying to get a dialogue between AJDS and a group of backbench parliamentarians on these issues could, I think, be enormously useful and profitable.
Yeah.
Can I
Dandy.
one more question, then I can have
Let's
dessert?
do one more question. There's one
I
more.
just, I'm not sure if people are aware that what's happening at the moment is that Egypt, with American help, is building this wall under Gaza on the border, which is going about 18 meters